I followed a conventional approach using synthetic fertilizers and chemical pesticides for 25 years. We didn't even wear gloves when it was off the market in 90 days. By the time I finished 25 years later, I had independent helmet, air pack, Tyvek suit, because I realized, and then at that point I said, I'm just going from pesticide application to pesticide application. It's a treadmill. There was so much about the registration process that was absolutely not being told to us. I had to take all of my conventional horticultural knowledge on how to grow things and then teach myself organic protocols, because at that time you couldn't go anywhere to get an organic education. And unfortunately, still today, you can't go to a land-grant university and have them talk to you about organic.
So let's talk a little bit about just product swapping, right? Because there's a lot of people that just think that they can swap products. Let's take a conventional synthetic bag of this and put organic in its place. Why does that type of approach lead to failure usually?
It came to me as I was driving to do a public speech one night. And I was thinking about everything I was talking about. And then, I got to have a way that I can explain this to people. So I created what I call a systems approach to natural turf management. It's not just about product and calendar date, but it focuses first and foremost on the living portion of the soil, everything under our feet. What's going on in the underground portion of the nitrogen cycle and how I need to focus strongly on that. Second part of it was bringing in cultural practices and doing things that very often have been overlooked in a conventional program. If you don't aerate, you get a compaction weed. If you get a compaction weed, you use a pesticide. Then you break out your soluble nitrogen and you get the grass to look good for 6 or 8 weeks. And now you're back at it all over again. Then the third piece of it was product choice, exclusive use of natural organic product, most importantly, governed by soil testing, not just chemistry, but texture and biological, as well. So I guess the way I look at it, the most important thing, and the reason that focusing on the soil and biological life is first in my systems-based approach model that we have, is that's the most important. Because I can't make anything else work unless I start with that. And I think one of the greatest aha moments was probably in 2008, 9, 10, when I was traveling around the country working with school districts and municipalities, and we were in Ohio. And I was doing a 3-hour training I was working on a pilot project, teaching them how to take selected properties, move them into organic management. And the fellow, we were in their offices or their auditorium. And then the superintendent, whose park it was, Riverfront Park, where we were, was highly technically educated in turfgrass science. But we walked out the door to walk his park, and he said, Chip, now for the first time in my life, I understand what's going on under my feet. And that's what it's all about. So if we start with that understanding,
really feeding the soil and not the plant, right? So let's take a technical look, if you could, at the soil food web. Like, how do we do that? What's that transition looking like?
In that bag of organic fertilizer, or in that compost, or just simply in that fraction of organic matter itself in the soil, which is continually breaking down and decomposing to release nutrients, that it's the bacterial community that's responsible for breaking that down, getting it into their single cell bodies, and then having the higher level protozoans as predators consume the active bacteria, and the immediate release is ammonium nitrogen that is soluble. It goes into the root of the grass plant. It's an NH4 plus. It's a cation. It's attracted to the exchange sites for nitrogen reserve. Nitrifying bacteria slide in, pick up ammonium, convert it to nitrate. We know that cool season turfgrass, any turfgrass, warm or cool season, prefers its nitrogen, 50% ammonium, 50% nitrate. And if we focus on the bacterial and protozoan community, that's what we get. So that's where that understanding of the soil food web. So you're not going to put this fertilizer down, organic fertilizer, and expect to get a 48-hour reaction. But if you have patience and give it 7 to 10 days, you're going to have greener grass, more steady release of nitrogen, no peak and valley, which I call too much and not enough. If the organic fertility curve is basically a straight line.
So that was a great way to explain that, though, Chip. I appreciate that. So you kind of have like a 3-pillar, I guess, approach, right? You said very importantly, soil testing, the big 3, right? That's number 1. You always want to see what's going on in the soil and why chemistry alone isn't, maybe not enough. Now we need to talk about soil biology, which we just did, right? Biomass and diversity and soil texture. Now you gain all that information through soil testing. It's not just a guess. You actually send samples off and do that testing, correct?
Most agronomic soil testing is just soil chemistry. Macronutrients, micronutrients, base saturation, cation exchange capacity, organic matter percentage, and it kind of begins and ends there. And they look for deficiencies in the soil and then prescribed, usually salt-based materials, calcium, magnesium, potassium, nitrogen, all salts. And that's how they manage. We don't get involved in any project unless the client agrees to our panel of soil testing. And, it should be understood that a soil test is only a snapshot in time because, texture is constant. Chemistry can be slightly fluctuating, but microbes live for seconds, minutes, hours, weeks, days, months, years, and they change seasonally. So I've done so much biological testing, and I test winter, spring, summer, and fall. And you can see that at different times of the year, well, not winter in the north, but winter down south. So our testing protocol involves testing for soil structure, sand, silt, and clay. Gives me key to the ability of a soil to potentially hold on to nutrients based on clay. It gives me an idea on how that soil might compact, water retention, water movement. So that's important to it. Then we do typical soil chemistry to find out where the macro and micronutrients are, and specifically looking at the first thing I look at in a chemistry test is base saturation to see what I've got there on the exchange sites. Second thing I look at is the organic matter percentage. And then the last thing I look at is NPK. And because you have to get beyond, I have PowerPoint slides that say beyond NPK. And then we take that same sample and it goes under a microscope, and we're identifying total levels of fungi and bacteria. Then we're looking at the active fraction of both groups of organisms, looking at the protozoa, looking at endomycorrhizal colonization, and then making an assessment based on that. Now we've just in the last year and a half gone one step further for what we work with a laboratory in Maine that does a soil health analysis, which integrates chemistry and biology and brings them together. And instead of doing a Malic 3 strong acid extraction, which is conventionally the one that's usually done, we rely on more like a modified Morgan, which is a weak acid extraction, because I don't really care how much nutrients totally in the soil. I want to know what that plant has. And so what's bioavailable. Now, just in the last 6 months, we've incorporated extensive carbon testing, where we're looking at pounds of carbon per acre, water-soluble carbon, which is a byproduct of carbon exudate through photosynthesis. Then we look at what carbon is immediately biologically available and what carbon is there in reserve for future bioavailability. So gathering all this information then helps us get a real snapshot of where we need to go.
Talking now, I guess the second pillar would be kind of cultural practices, right? The unsexy but essential basics. Mowing height, aeration, and aggressive overseeding is the primary weed control. Do you still aerate these lawns? What's your mowing heights? Like, let's talk a little bit about that, I guess, right? The things that seem so simple but are so important.
Yeah, I manage grass that's cut in Florida, high profile diamond zoysia at 3/16 of an inch, and I manage cool season turf grass at 3 inches, and everything in between. So the cultural aspects, you have to fall back on genetics. So, if you're growing Kentucky bluegrass and repeatedly cutting it at 3/4 of an inch or an inch, which is done on high profile Kentucky bluegrass sports fields. And I have to deal with that. I've done semi-pro, not semi-pro, sorry, AA professional baseball and 1-inch Kentucky blue. I've done NCAA soccer fields at an inch of monoculture Kentucky blue. But the 3 inches is the ideal stress-free height for cool season turf grass. Warm season turf grasses based on genetics, like I said, can be from 3/16 to 2.5 inches, depending on what we're trying to do. If you're looking at cool season turf grass, for every half inch you go below 3 inches, the cost to manage goes up because cultural intensity needs to go up. And cultural intensity is the sum total of everything it takes to grow that grass: water, labor, and input, whether it's input biologically or input for soil chemistry. But if you're going if you're growing it at 1 inch, you're spoon feeding that grass. You're doing something all the time to it. If you're growing it at 3 inches, which is stress-free, you can get by with a much less aggressive program. No matter what it is, if I didn't have that roadmap of soil testing, it would be a guess. And you made an analogy to a medical situation, and that is exactly what happens. You're not going to go and have a doctor do all kinds of things for you without some kind of a preliminary test. Otherwise, it's guesswork. So you get some kind of a test, and hopefully you have a doctor that gives you a legitimate response based on the results of that test. So that's what we follow, and we passed up all kinds of jobs because I'm not going to go in and put myself on the line and guess and say that's what you need to do. Because if I don't know that there's enough active bacteria to break my organic fertilizer down, I'm going to have somebody invest a lot of money in organic fertilizer and they're going to put it down and nothing's going to happen. So then I know that the first thing that I need to do is invest in a $25 gallon of molasses, ramp up the bacterial community so that it is better in a position to break down that organic fertilizer. So in other words, we always want to put the horse before the cart and not the other way around.
What about aeration, aggressive overseeding for weed control? Are those things that you do still recommend?
Yes, because my feeling and approach is that if I'm looking to reduce synthetic herbicides, something has to take its place.
Sure.
I can't just pull them out and not do anything. So something's going to take its place. For me, aeration and overseeding, assuming it's a grass that can be overseeded, because down south we do a lot of warm season turf work, and many of those grasses don't ever get overseeded. We're relying on reproduction to keep it thick. But when I'm developing a cool season turf grass program like you have there in Colorado, I'm trying to get 3 things: modest blade growth so that I can properly photosynthesize. I'm looking to get aggressive root growth, and most importantly, horizontal extension to thicken it up. Grasses don't reproduce as fast as we would like to keep weed pressures at bay. And an interesting thing with turf grass, what a lot of people don't understand, is that an individual grass plant only lives for 12 to 18 months, and then it dies. The system is perennial, but it's based on reproduction and always growing new grasses, whether we're growing with Kentucky blue, which is rhizomatous, whether we're down south and it's stoloniferous, or whether it's like a fescue or a perennial rye, which is a clump former and just sends out tillers. All of that thickens the grass. If I did nothing else, I was just on a Zoom a couple hours ago, and I told them, if you do nothing else with no budget and you aerate and overseed, you will improve your turf grass system. Aeration does not simply, most people think, oh, we're going to poke holes in there, we're going to vibrate the soil, and we're going to loosen up the soil. Well, yes, we are. And that does make it better for root penetration. At 300 PSI of compaction, roots will no longer grow. They grow it nicely at 100 PSI, they get restricted at 200 PSI, and they stop at 300 PSI. You have a penetrometer, I use that all the time. So then when we aerate, we break that up. But the other thing, other than just root growth, the most important thing in my mind is gas exchange. I need the carbon dioxide down in the soil that is a result of biomass. Organisms are the same as we are, take in oxygen, give off CO2, and the roots of the grass plant, oxygen, CO2 release. I need that CO2 to cycle out, and I need oxygen to infuse in. That way, I have an aerobic soil environment, and I'm going to grow all the correct portions of the soil food web. Once I get compacted, I lose my oxygen, I lose soil structure, I lose pore space, then the soil goes anaerobic. The bad guys survive. Ciliates are facultative anaerobes. They take over. They don't do much of anything positive for, nutrient cycling. And then we begin to struggle. So for me, cultural practices are more important than that bag of fertilizer. And that's why that's second in my systems approach, because I put that much importance, because the cultural practices and the right way to cut the grass, the right way to irrigate, most people irrigate, if they have an irrigation system, they irrigate the wrong way. And grass is not a water pig. Grass likes to be on the edge. Too much water fills the pore spaces with water. You lose oxygen and the grass struggles. So cultural practices, can't stress enough how important that is, tied together with the biological community.
And then I guess last of this 3-pillar portion of this is the product choices, right? Using inputs as prescriptions based on data, not a calendar. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, actually, in this podcast, right? So we're looking at inputs as a prescription, right? Like you said, we're going to write a prescription for this. This is what this needs. And it's based off data.
Yeah, just a couple sentences on that. It's, yes, it is all governed by soil testing. And when I create a program of product input, some of the input is designed to end up directly stimulating the growth of turf grass. The other part of the input, and probably the most important part, is designed to focus on building and creating healthy soil microbial community. In a conventional program, you're putting an input that you just going to see the results with what happens up here. So our programs are equally focused above and below ground. And if we didn't focus it that way, based on soil testing, we probably would not get the results that we generally expect to see.
Absolutely. It's kind of what you were talking about. When you use synthetic fertilizers, you get that massive flush. It grows like crazy. And then you get the massive valley and as the, fertilizer wears off. So let's look a little bit at weed thresholds. How do you move your audience or the people that you're dealing with from a zero tolerance monoculture, which sometimes you can't, like in turf fields, right? Or in sports fields, like it has to be monocultured per se, Kentucky bluegrass 1 inch, like you were explaining, but to kind of like a functional biodiversity. Maybe there's a few weeds out there. Yes, you don't want them. You're going to get rid of them through overseeding. But how do you move that audience from that zero tolerance to at least accepting, okay, you know what, there could be a few weeds or, maybe adding other species of grasses in, things like that?
So, yeah, I'm an advocate of getting genetic diversity through different grasses in there. So monocultures are the hardest thing to grow. There's no question about that. Monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass is more difficult to grow than diversity of cool season turf grasses. Years ago, I defined successful organic management for pretty high profile turf at less than 5% weed pressures per acre. That is really meaning walking around a 1.3 acre football field and seeing a weed here and a weed there and a weed there, but not 100% monoculture. But then the flip side of that is on an NCAA competition, D1 soccer field, there is no tolerance, right? I have to have that monoculture. I manage large private estates, 55,000 square feet, football size areas of grass, where when I walk in with the client, he's going to say, what's that clover over there? What's that weed over there? So I have that, so there is that expectation. But for general lawn turf that, I try to tell people that clover is actually good. We all know that. It's a legume. It's a nitrogen fixation plant. Takes atmospheric nitrogen, N2 gas, and deposits it through the bacterial community in the soil. Protozoa come in, and then we get our nitrogen. So that's typically what happens. But, the way I tell people is that expectation that you have of absolutely no clover in your lawn was created for you by pesticide companies in the 1950s that had developed this post-World War II product, and they needed to market it. Prior to that, clover was a highly desirable plant incorporated because it's stoloniferous and it grows perfectly harmoniously with cool season turf grass.
If I'm not mistaken, it was actually in seed mixes, correct?
All of them. All seed mixes prior to World War II contained Dutch white clover because you didn't need to fertilize. You cut the grass, recycled the grass clippings, you picked up a pound of nitrogen from that. Clover gave you another pound and two plus pounds, and then you got the biological community giving you another half to 3/4. So you got close to your 3 pounds of nitrogen without ever having to buy a bag of fertilizer. But then the pesticide industry, the fertilizer industry came into play. And pesticides, it's widely known that they're a result of chemical warfare research, World War I and World War II. And then synthetic fertilizers in the Haber-Bosch process with anhydrous ammonia created 4600 urea, and they had to find a market for that. So clover, which was a highly desirable plant, now all of a sudden became branded as a bad guy and said, you can't have a good lawn. You've got a weed in there. I have this product that's going to keep your grass in good shape, but it's going to take out all that undesirable weed. And oh, by the way, I have another product over here that I'm happy to sell you that's going to give you all the nitrogen you need when you kill that weed. So as a turf guy, I have slides in every presentation I do that says, I'm going to be very hard pressed to stand here as a turf guy and brand clover as a bad guy, because bringing that genetic diversity, I can understand getting rid of broadleaf plantain. I can understand trying to get rid of some of the undesirable sedges and things like that. And for most of that stuff, we now have organic alternatives that can do that. But clover's another story. But that being said, I do have high profile. I have one really high profile client that doesn't mind the clover and doesn't mind the diversity. And, they actually like it. And, and it's a great thing. Then I have another client that has a horse pasture that wants the horse pasture to look like a front lawn. And when there's a little bit of clover as a legume that gets in the pasture, she goes, what's all this clover? So it really is become an art to kind of talk to these people honestly about meeting their expectations and what, in my impression, is a definition of a good lawn versus almost an artificial lawn. I mean, I have to admit that the 50,000 square feet of monoculture, but I have to chase around, sometimes with a sprayer with a little bit of an iron chelate, and herbicide, organic herbicide, or almost organic herbicide. The chelate is not, but and knock out these little patches of clover, because he'll walk with me and say, oh, and like that. So there's ways to get around it, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why we've been actually distributing and selling Pipolina micro clover for years now, way before it was cool. And we've seen a huge upswing in that. And there's a lot of people that are starting to purchase it and interseed it into their lawns, big homes, small landscapes. It doesn't matter. People are starting to wake up to the fact that clover is a good thing, which I think that's great.
I just quickly will tell you this project that I addressed in Providence, Rhode Island, and the conventional contractor was using all kinds of herbicides to get a monoculture. But at the end of the day, the executive director wants clover in there. So the organic program moving forward is not going to be chasing out clover. It's going to be maintaining diversity.
Which is exactly what you want. So that's great. I'm going to move on to the 2026 landscape. Some things changed this year. Regulations, climate. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the PFAS wave. So as of January 1st, 2026, states have entered bans or reporting requirements intentionally added PFASs, okay, in fertilizers and pesticides. How is this forcing the turf industry to change? In some of those states, I'll just say Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Minnesota, Vermont, and Washington. They all have pretty strict regulation on that now.
Yeah.
So how is that, forcing this industry to change now, the turf industry?
So I'm in Maine, and the whole PFAS issue surfaced here in Maine as a result of 20 years of biosolid compost applications on agricultural land that have rendered it useless. So a lot more than people realize, PFAS is a component of a lot of pesticides as an inert ingredient. And inert ingredients are protected by trade secret laws, and we don't even know that they're in there. Nobody ever knew. But now with this further explanation, we know. So that's going to force either the manufacturer to eliminate these different, and gosh, I test for PFAS in soils all the time. I do, in addition to all my other testing on certain projects, I do toxicity testing in soils. And gosh, we're looking at like 40 different, of these different PFAS compounds. And they, can be there in really small amounts or in big amounts, but it's going to force manufacturers to take it out as an inert ingredient and reformulate the product, or it's going to take them off the market, not be allowed in these states, which I assume will expand as things move forward in the next 2 to 5 years, that more and more states are going to regulate this. When they see what happens with the buildup over time of these forever chemicals.
Absolutely. And that PFAS, like you're saying, it's going to be interesting. You're going to see who had it in their product pretty quick,
exactly right.
At least in these states. Either they're going to reformulate and rebrand, or they're going to be out of the marketplace. So that, I think it's a great thing.
There was a big fight here in Maine when the chemical companies confronted, they actually sidestepped the Board of Pesticide Control, because the Board of Pesticide Control is really just a defender of the pesticide industry. And that's a whole other story. But they legislature said, you either disclose or your products aren't going to be sold in Maine anymore. So Maine really drew the hard line, and you've got two choices: take your product out of the state or conform.
Non-functional turf ban. There's some legislation that's actually been put into place here in the state where we're in Colorado. It's Colorado's bill. It's SB 24-005. And that prohibits high water, cool season turf in commercial and institutional areas.
Yep.
Fake turf or turf in sports fields, right? Like actually you're able to do that. Like at a school, the high school wants to put their football field into a turf that's not living, right? So a regular turf, you can do that. You just cannot do it in any type of institutional areas. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I do a lot of work in Colorado, up and down the Front Range. We just had a call last week about this very issue. For years, I've been saying there's too much grass in the world. A lot of it needs to be reduced and eliminated and replaced. We've got the definition between functional turf and aesthetic turf. And, taking it that way, we've also got alternative turf grass species that can be more native. They're not going to look like the manicured lawn, but they will absolutely serve the purpose. But yeah, that is happening more and more. I get into that a lot in Southern California. The same type of thing is happening down there. So I'm doing these big HOAs of, 400, 500, 600 homes. People will be allowed to have a very small, reasonable area of managed grass for the aesthetics around their house. But the mandate from the state is going to be that a lot of your open space, common space, has to be taken out of. So now I'm working with the boards of directors of these associations, as well as the contractors, on what a 5-year plan is going to be for compliance, that how we can get rid of this, non-functional grass that just gets watered and fertilized and looked at, into something that is more environmentally sound and compliant with legislation.
So could that potentially even be like native grasses that grow there natively, things like that? Is that kind of what you're looking at then?
Yeah, native grasses. I mean, there's different types of grasses, and it's all going to be what they determine to be the aesthetic. Now, I've done a lot of work with buffalo grass, which is a grass that's out your way. But buffalo grass is genetically supposed to grow to 6 or 7 inches and stay there and only be cut once or twice a year. One of my National Park Service projects, they put in buffalo grass and cut it every 7 days, and it disappeared because you were contrary to the genetics. So when we're talking about these native grasses, we have to then first decide, do we want something that's going to be 6 or 7 inches and look absolutely beautiful? Or do we want to keep it cut at 3 inches and use a grass that has the genetic capability to continue to survive, reproduce, and grow at a 3-inch mowing height? And there are plenty of options.
And that's where you're going to work them through this, because some people might say, hey, give me the 6 to 7 inch tall grass. I don't have to mow it, but 2 times a year. So I'm saving money there.
Yeah, exactly right.
And environmental impact through, the usage of gasoline and exhaust and all that. So that's great that you're working people through that as well. Look a little bit at climate resilience now. How do organic systems manage extreme heat and drought better than synthetic ones? It's due to the deeper root structures, obviously, and improved water holding capacity in soils. But can you kind of just explain that, like how that actually works?
Sure. For, the organic matter fraction of the soil, think of it as a sponge that holds on to water in the rhizosphere, in the immediate portion of the root zone, which typically is, when you look at the horizons, we're typically talking about the A horizon, right? You have the O horizon, which is the organic layer, then the A horizon. That's where you see these levels of organic matter. So as we build organic matter through use of organic fertilizers, which, by the way, synthetic fertilizers do not build organic matter, as we improve organic matter, we're improving the sponge and we're holding moisture longer. We're encouraging a deeper root system. So then that aspect reduces watering. And it's also telling people that if you get in an area like yours, which is arid, then the little bit of rain that you get, you want to hold it there as long as possible. If somebody's using an irrigation system, and typically installers will set a time clock to water 15 minutes a zone 3 times a week, repeat shallow irrigations encourages shallow root. Deeper and infrequent watering encourages deeper root. And that's really the name of the game for getting resiliency in a turf system.
Scaling up, let's talk a little bit about schools, sports, and municipalities, because I know this is yes, you work on smaller projects too, but really your project and your focus is a lot, I think, Chip, are on these large scale projects. So let's talk a little bit about high performance turfs. And you mentioned numerous, NCAA, D1 soccer fields. Can organic fields manage the wear and tear of, say, a varsity football team or a soccer team or professional team? Can they handle it the same as like a conventional type of a turf, or is it even better actually?
It's actually better. When we talk about football, normally, I've got to struggle with a project now where they're practicing on their game day field. And most people don't do that, right? They practice and have a practice field and beat it up. And there's nothing you can do about that. But if you have, the high profile fields where you're investing a lot of money and there's a significant cash value to that field, absolutely, it can stand up, in my mind, better than its synthetic counterpart, because with an organic program, I'm generally getting a deeper root system. I'm getting, as long as I'm managing the biological fraction right and ensuring that there's enough potassium available, I'm getting thick cell walls. I'm improving the structure of the plant as well as soil structure. And as long as I'm cutting with genetics the way it should be, or, if it's a municipality that has, fields for youth sports, there's nothing wrong with 2.5 inches. Even some do 3 inches. The ball rolls a little low, but soccer and football can be played on 3 inches, 2.5 inches. When you get to the highest profile and grass begins to be cut down to 1.5 inches or an inch, as long as we are doing what is needed, as I mentioned, from the spoon feeding or from the constant addressing of needs, like the shorter it goes, the more you have to do. As long as we follow that principle in conjunction with the genetics of whatever grass we're growing, then we're going to have something that will stand up every bit as good as the synthetic counterpart. And the secret to that is enough available nitrogen. Now we're trying to build it so it's always there in the soil so that it gets cheaper down the road because the soil's doing a lot and you don't have to buy it from the bag. But in this transition period, as long as I've got enough available nitrogen to get that horizontal extension of rhizomes in the Kentucky bluegrass, I'm going to keep a thick turf system. Overseeding is part of that.
That's perfect. And then you've worked a little bit also with National Park Service and pro sports teams as well. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I did National Park Service from probably 2010 to 2018 in the Midwest region. And we did about 12 projects. I actually worked with higher level management in Washington to create a natural turf manual program. What happens a lot of times is administrations change, people change. And we had worked for 3 years with higher level staff and created this amazing document only to get just shelved by the next person that came along that wanted to keep it conventional. And so it didn't stay as a permanent thing. But in the projects that we did one in Iowa when we actually showed it was actually President and Mrs. Hoover's boyhood home and burial and gravesite. And we did work there and we showed that after the second year, we reduced product input, the grass got better, weed pressures went down. And that was a very highly successful project at the time that then they began to move to other areas and experience great results. So we did work with them. We did work with them back in the day. Again, currently administrations and things change, people retire, and that's kind of the way that goes.
Let's debunk the myth that organic is more expensive. Everybody says, oh, it's just going to cost you more money. We don't want organic turf. You don't want to do that. And then let's also understand that upfront investment versus the long-term savings on water and chemical inputs or your inputs, right? Your return on investment. If you could just break that down for us, if you don't mind.
Sure. That's a conventional industry talking point that organic doesn't work. Organic's too expensive and you're going to end up with a lot of weeds. And I've been fighting that since the late 90s. And that if you have clover in an athletic field, it's a slipping hazard and creates opportunity for athletes' injury. Never been proven. There's not one case that shows that's true. So all that's conventional industry talking points. But what ends up happening in a natural transition is you do have upfront cost and then you have cost savings. So what you're trying to do is to undo what's been done through inexpensive conventional inputs and redo it with organic inputs. And in a conventional program, I can tell you lots of them never use grass seed. They don't aerate. If they do, maybe once a year, when you understand that the benefits of aeration last 3 to 5 weeks. So if you're doing it once a year, what's the point? So you're always compacted and you're always getting weeds and you're on the weed killer treadmill. So typically with programs, there's a cost difference between all granular, all liquid, and hybrid liquid and granular. And there can be a 10 or 15% upfront increase in cost only because organic nitrogen in organic fertilizers is usually limited to 10% or below, where synthetic fertilizers can go all the way up to 46%. So you can fertilize a football field with 6 bags, or you can fertilize it with 12 to 18 bags. So there is the difference in cost in fertilizer. But if you're delivering 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet from conventional soluble material, you don't need 1 pound of N from organic fertilizers. You can get by with 3/4 rate there, even some half pound rates. So I alternate like 3/4 and a half. So I'm coming up with 1 1/4 delivered pounds and getting the same benefit as the person that's doing 2 pounds of synthetic in that same 2-month window. So that's what I try to teach, is that I have to undo the conventional thinking and reintroduce organic thinking.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is that's why in organics, 1+1 doesn't always equal 2, right?
That's correct.
Those are the things you look at, and that's what we see too, even in conventional, when you start utilizing conventional nitrogen, leaching, volatilization. I mean, you're putting out usually more than you really need due to the fact that you don't get full benefit from it. Whereas organics, it stays usually in the soil profile. You're building the health of the soil. You're building and utilizing what you're paying for, actually. It's an investment versus a direct expense.
Right. And I have to teach people what volatilization is, because they don't understand that a lot of that has gone that way, or it leaches that way. Down in South Florida, on one of my big projects, I was told by the person that I replaced that, well, down here in Florida, the soil's so sandy, we put down twice as much of everything as we know that we need, because we know that half of it's going to end up in the Everglades.
Wow. That's, it's amazing, isn't it? And you fix that. Built some organic matter, fix the soil. You don't have to do that.
It's 100% organic right now.
Yeah. I like it. All right, let's look at this last piece, the analyze, prescribe, and train method. How do you help groundskeepers who fear losing their tools, right? Because there's groundkeepers out there that, like, they've been trained with pesticides. They've been trained with these chemical inputs to take care of certain things. How do you train them to basically wipe the fear away, per se, of not having those tools at their disposal?
Mm-hmm. So I coined the phrase years ago called awareness through education. You were trained conventionally, you need to be trained organically. So I'm not going to tell you to forget everything you know about growing turf grass. I'm just going to say you need to open your mind to begin to accept and understand some of the things I'm going to talk to you about, what happens with organic. For a turf manager, for a golf course superintendent, for somebody in charge of a D1 soccer field, the biggest issue is fear of failure, right? Their job. They get the job. So they have this inherent fear of failure. I've also always believed that the more widespread adoption of organic lawn care and organic land management practices is simply limited by the lack of education. So I'm not looking to come in a high-powered way and insult people and say, what you're doing is terrible, it's wrong. I'm saying, look, you've been doing it this way. You have a deep understanding of what you're doing, but now let me show you the counterpart to that, take away your fear of failure, and show you through pilot projects or understanding. So a lot of my work with municipalities, I mean, when I do a D1 soccer field, it's all or nothing, right? Everything's on the line. But when we're working in a municipality that may have 35, 40 acres of properties, we're taking, 2 to 5 acres and putting an organic management plan in place. And through the 2 or 3 year transition period, we're teaching and growing their level of education, growing their comfort level, in reducing and eliminating their fear of failure, so that then they can take what they've learned and expand it to the other 25 acres.
So it's more of just I like what you said. And the simple fact is, like, hey, what you're doing is completely wrong, because immediately you're going to get resistance. It's like, you're an expert at this. Now let me show you another way to do it. And like you said, a D1 field, it's all or nothing, baby, right? You're all in. Whereas in an HOA, you have a little bit of leeway to say, here's 5 acres, you do yours over here the way you prefer, and then I'll do this 5 acres or whatever that looks like. And we can compare and contrast. It's a little easier. The future of turf, AI and precision agronomy. And the precision agronomy side of it, it already sounds like you pretty well have that down through the soil testing, all of those things. But what about like drones, soil sensors, AI mapping? Are you seeing that start to be put into play in the turf industry now? We're seeing it in the agriculture industry a lot, and we work in turf as well. I haven't seen it as much yet in turf. I mean, maybe there's some, but are you starting to see more like moisture sensors and AI being used, those types of things, drones for application?
Yeah, we're actually going to be working with a soil sensor project it was actually developed by CU Boulder. And my senior project manager is going to dialogue with them. And this was created for ag, but we're going to do some work with this in turf. It's not going to give me the level of detail that I would get with microscopy, but it will give me a very good idea on what is what is going on. Drones. We actually will be introducing drones for site analysis and observation this spring on some of our bigger projects, where we can oversee, looking at a 2 or 3 acre parcel, getting right up and looking for hot spots that people wouldn't see so that they can be addressed. Because so many times on these big properties, you don't need to deal with the whole 3 acres. You might only need to deal with 15,000 square feet out of over 130,000 square feet. So that part of the technology was brought into it. Robotics is, coming into the equation. GPS, mapping. All irrigation heads now can be mapped with a GPS coordinate to make all of that, so much easier. So that we're all is coming into sort of the high levels of turf management for sure.
Man, that's great. That's great. Yeah. And those hot spots, like you say, it's turning it's called precision agriculture when you're dealing with it. It's going to be precision turf management. And you're going to be able to really pinpoint and see what's going on. Like you said, it's a lot cheaper to treat 15,000 square feet versus 3 acres if you only have an issue in those. And that's all precision. Then you're going to go in there, focus on that, and deal with it. I guess this is more of like a legacy question, right? I mean, you've been in this for a long time. You said over 50 years, around 55 years now. What are you looking at, or what do you think the American landscape is going to look like in 20 years, or what would you like for it to look like?
Well, knowing what I know about synthetic fertilizer impact and chemical pesticide impact, because I've been very deep in the pesticide issue for 30 plus years, and as well as a hands-on person 25 years before that. So with the changes, with what I've seen happen since the 1950s to 2025, 2026, with negative impacts in all kinds of land areas with this, it's clearly evident to me that we can't go on for another 50 years and have this same chemical intensive approach to land. Otherwise, we're not going to have anything. I mean, we're looking at a lot of the big business, conventional ag, mega farms in the Midwest. Soil is not soil. And it's just a medium that holds the plant root so the plant can grow up. Everything is controlled. I mean, there's no biological life in the soil left. There was actually research scientists went out and proved that. Stayed in a cornfield in Iowa for 24 hours. Nothing's living in there. And so we can't go on like that. So we have to return the functional productivity to soils. So the way I envision things moving forward and what I would like to see, unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be around to actually see it, but we need to get away from the expectations that were created by a corporation, by an industry to sell product, to generate revenue, to perpetuate their corporation by telling us what our landscape needs to look like. And we need to embrace a more holistic approach, understand that monocultures of non-native, all our grasses in the United States, other than those native grasses that we're talking about replacement, they all came from Western Europe and the British Isles, or China and the Orient and Africa for warm season grasses. So trying to grow a non-native as a monoculture, the two hardest things you can do. Now you're trying to do that together. And it's just not functionally the smart way to approach things. So I'm not saying that everybody have to have a weedy lawn. Everybody has to be looking at weeds everywhere. But it's my firm belief that adopting a lot of the stuff that we've just been talking about here can produce entirely satisfactory results by doing things that are more healthy for the planet, healthy for soils, perpetuating these soils for centuries to come, and not finding out in 75 years that you have all this soil here that's basically no good.
And I think we're headed that way. I really do. Deep in my heart, I think we're heading in the right direction, and it's great to see that you're actually you're leading it up, Chip. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the reality of it, and it's neat. I think you're going to see a lot of changes happen even in the nearer future than even 20 years. I think 20 years, we're going to see massive changes. Personally, I think in the near future, we're going to see, we're starting to see this even with the PFAS and those types of things coming in. So, Chip, you often say pesticides don't grow grass. If they do not grow grass, what are they doing to the soil's long-term ability to sustain life?
Sure, they don't grow grass. They just take out something that we want removed. If we have a fungus issue, if we have a weed issue, if we have an insect issue, they're all symptoms. They're not the problem. The underlying problem is something, it can be compaction for weeds, it can be something out of balance in the soil with fungi. So what we end up looking at is trying to do the right strategies to work with the genetics of an individual grass to provide healthy soil, healthy biological activity that can work with those genetics and incorporate cultural strategies to produce a healthy grass plant that at the end of the day, we all understand an insect attacks the weak link in the landscape. If we have strong, healthy grass, we're likely not to get insect pressures. And if we have the right balance of fungi in the soil, we're going to suppress most fungal pathogens. Good soil structure takes care of most weed issues.
Perfect. Next one, you focus heavily on soil biology testing. For a professional manager, what is the single most important biological marker they should be looking for?
The two most important things that they would look at up front is the bacterial community. How much is there in total? Total means active and dormant. And then how much of that is actively working? And if it goes under a microscope, they want to look at the higher level predators because it's the flagellates and amoeba that consume the active bacteria. And that's the underground portion of the nitrogen cycle. So we need to make sure the underground portion of the nitrogen cycle is adequately working to be able to support the above ground portion.
The one action item, and I always like this one, if a listener changes only one thing, and this can be a large scale, because all of these things that we're talking about today, yes, they are being used on, large scale systems, right? We're talking about, you can also take this same principle and shrink it down to the guy's 1,000 square foot lawn that he has at his house. That's the great thing about this. So if a listener today, and we have listeners of all sizes, from, individuals all the way up to large scale managers and things like that. But if a listener changes only one thing tomorrow, what should it be?
Doesn't matter whether it's the 1,000 square foot lawn or the multiple acre large property. The one thing that should be changed is the thought process that I don't want to feed the plant. I want to feed the soil and let the soil feed the plant. So that means I want to put something in there that's going to grow that microbial community and replace all of that process to get nitrogen generated without the reliance on water-soluble synthetics. So it's beginning to take away what you see, right? Because we all look at the grass. But now I tell people, and I've been lecturing to homeowners for 30 years, which I don't do that anymore, but I used to do it a lot. And I would tell them, don't just look at your lawn and decide you think you know what it needs. What I want you to focus on is everything you can't see. And if you do that with your product, and I created this recipe actually once for a group of garden club ladies and said, you could probably stop your fertilizer and buy a $12 hose end sprayer, fill it with 32 ounces, or fill it with 28 ounces of water and 4 ounces of horticultural blackstrap molasses, unsulfured, and spray that on the lawn 3 times during the summer, and you'll probably get the best lawn you ever had. And you don't need high-priced NPK inputs to.
I like it. Thank you so much for that. And, and the listeners are going to appreciate that as well. If you don't mind, Chip, where can people find you?
At this point, my daughter, we never had a big social media presence because it always fell to me. And I've just added on significant staff. So my daughter, runs all that. She is developing, so they can find us on Osborne Organics on Facebook, Osborne Organics now Instagram, and Osborne Organics YouTube channel. And so we are just been the last 8 months developing a program of creating lots of video content on our YouTube channel. And then our website is starting tomorrow. We have a meeting. We're going to redo the whole website. And I'm creating a library of all my writings of the last 20 years, excerpted from all my highly technical reports, based down into a 1 and 2 sheet easy download on what happens when I aerate. Why do I overseed? Why do I focus on biology? So I would say within the next 6 months, we're going to have this both video and like text library there, because we and the Organic Landscape Association, I founded that to bring together all aspects of the landscape industry, from the advocate through to the service provider, to the product developer, to the wholesaler, and trying to bring them all together so that the organic industry, which, as you know, is extremely fragmented, that is all getting its second rollout probably by June of this year to bring that. But we have our mission statement. We have lots of good information up there at this point, and that's only going to expand. And our goal is to educate not just the professional part of the industry, but to educate the homeowner on how and why they need to make the right choices. And then, frankly, what to tell the service provider, because at the end of the day, a service provider is going to do what the homeowner wants. So it's actually the power of all of this change in the next 10 or 20 years rests with the individual homeowner or the individual board of directors of an HOA, not within the service provider industry.
Well, that's perfect. And it really sounds like you're getting this educational portion out and really wrapped together in a nice, concise piece, whether it's the print pieces that you're going to have, or what are the PDFs, whatever that may be. And it's great that you're taking your knowledge and your wisdom and you're passing it on now to future generations. As time goes, you have a lot of knowledge. When I said that you're the godfather of organic and natural landscapes and turf, that is the truth. And so by having somebody like that at the end of the day, be able to pass forward that knowledge and wisdom, that's exactly what we're looking for, and what our listeners are looking for. And that's just like for us, if you like this Soil Talks podcast, you can find us on YouTube. If you would, like our channel, follow us. We have people, industry leaders on here talking about pressing issues. If you're on Apple podcasts, give us a 5-star review, like us. If you're on Spotify, if you do the same, we'd appreciate it, because we're trying to push this out to the masses. It's important. It's important people know about this. And I just really thank you today, Chip, for being on with us, for pouring out your knowledge, your wisdom to our listeners. And then not only to our listeners, but we're going to make sure that this gets pushed out to as many people as we can, so they can learn and know what the truth is, why it's important, especially in the landscape. I mean, many people play in their lawns. They're in their landscapes all the time, even homeowners, and they don't realize the importance of what this means to change a landscape over to a natural or organic landscape. So I just want to thank you for your time today. Like I said, if you'd like our YouTube channel, follow us. We would appreciate that. And again, Chip, thanks for your time. Appreciate your knowledge and wisdom. And we definitely look forward to having you back on here again.
No, I'd love to. And thanks very much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chip. You have a great day.
Thank you. You too.